Everyone, today I'm going to talk you through a day in the life of a privacy officer. We're going to start with, this is set up so far just for retail. We will be looking to add other industries in the future, but because we're starting with retail, we're going to log in with an R name. This time it's going to be R Moon, because we're not Rebecca Drake, who's a steward. We're actually Richard Moon, because he is a privacy officer in retail. So when I log in, we're going to open up to the dashboards, and you'll see here that because Richard works in retail, he has the retail overview dashboard as Rebecca did. He also has a dashboard that is focused particularly on data privacy because that's his role. He works in data privacy. So this relates to kind of GDPR and CCPA concerns. And he also has his personal dashboard, which is where we're going to drive the demo from today. Now, just to introduce this, so we're going to actually use these top 3 widgets as our entry points for different bits of the demo. And only 2 of them are going to be ready right now, so we'll start there. First off, we're going to set the scene by talking a little bit around policies around privacy of personal data. So Richard Moon has come in today, and he can see that he's obviously tracking the status of the policies related to privacy of personal data. And he can see that 5 of them are still in the draft stage, not yet enforced. So he might click into this search to have a little look and gain some understanding around this. Immediately he can see that these all seem to be related to rights of the data subject or consumer. So this is different rights that the person whose personal data it is actually holds. You might want to understand why these are in draft status, as these have definitely been around since GDPR and had been enforced for a while. So he clicks into one to have a closer look. When we look at right to be forgotten, we can see immediately that there's a detailed definition. Could be a little bit clearer, but it's definitely there. He can understand the context by clicking into the Components tab, where we'll see that it's one of these rights of the data subject consumer, as we saw earlier, and that's actually part of the broader privacy of personal data policy, which includes general rules around the lawfulness of processing personal data and processing particularly sensitive personal data. So all of these are neatly structured. This all looks reasonable. Again, he's wondering why this is still in a draft status. If, however, he clicks into the Impact tab, Richard will see that the policy is actually being affected by 2 different regulations. It was being affected already by GDPR Article 17, and the recent inclusion of the CCPA regulation has meant that there's been some impact on this as well. At this point, Richard might think that it makes sense that this is being redrafted. It needs to be conclusive. This is not a policy that is particular to any one regulation. It is an internal policy that is influenced by external regulations. And he might want to raise a change request, or in fact see in this case that one has already been raised, asking the stakeholders to update the definition to include CCPA requirements. The description of this change request here explains that the definition is outdated as it's focused too much on GDPR, but does not include the CCPA perspective. When Richard understands this, he can see that it's already in hand, it's being managed by the owners of this policy, so he might just elect to follow it so that he can get any updates rather than intervening directly. Now that Richard has understood that first task and got a little bit of context around the privacy of personal data policy, he can go back to his overall dashboard and have a look at what his actual pending tasks are, as he has got a few. This is the second widget entry point into the demo. Now Richard can see that actually he better start with his overdue task. He can see that he's been asked to confirm appropriate safeguards are in place for a certain change request. So he's going to click into that change request and see what is required of him. The change request here shows that there is a privacy impact assessment required for a particular process related to order management. And so he can see here that this has been kicked off. A few initial steps have been taken. There have been some comments along the way. And now it is on his task to confirm that appropriate safeguards are in fact in place, since data is being transferred out of the region during this process. In order to understand what those safeguards should be and what the context is, he can visit the object, the process object called order management. Here he can take a look at the breakdown of the process and understand what is actually being managed here. It's clear to see that this is to do with a retailer providing goods to a customer. So when they get the order, they check the order type. If it's internal, they send the product directly and add the details back to a data warehouse and then ship the order. If it's an external order, then the retailer will send the purchase order to the manufacturer, who will receive and validate, and then they will ship the order. So we can see that there does look like there's some external transfer of data just from the process steps themselves. But in order to understand, he might want to add some overlays. What kind of data is being passed? You can check that by looking at the glossary overlay. You can see things like customer name and email address are being passed along with delivery details further on in the process. So that is definitely personal data that's going to be protected under those privacy policies. Let's have a look at who it's being passed to in terms of legal entities. We can see that the local UK entity is the data controller, but actually at this point when it's being sent to the manufacturer, it does transfer the data to a US entity, triggering it being passed outside of the local area and therefore needing transfers and appropriate safeguards to be in place, or a transfer decision that justifies this. Let's have a look at what that is, looking at the policies overlay. Policies overlay shows us that there is indeed a transfer on the basis of appropriate safeguards. Now, there can be transfers based on many different decisions as part of the GDPR regulation. If we see here in this components section, there can be things like transfers on the basis of an adequacy decision, or on the basis of binding company regulations, or a deviation for specific situations. But in this case, it has been decided that this transfer be made on the basis of appropriate safeguards. And so we have to live by that, and we have to ensure that the appropriate safeguards are in place. So this is why he's been asked to check this out. So let's have a quick look at the systems where those safeguards would have to be. We can see by adding the system overlay where this data is being held and where it's being sent to. So it's being sent to a data warehouse, Oracle Retail Data Warehouse. Now, if we want to see that from a different perspective and understand the data flow, we can actually go to the data map section within the process object. What this is doing is now scoping a lineage diagram rather than a process view. It's showing us data flows, and we can actually choose to understand how the data is flowing through these different systems. By adding the attributes overlay, we can see what's being passed across. We can even show the physical fields overlay to see that that's connected to the physical view as well. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit to see this a bit more clearly. We can see how all of this data is passing down through this data warehouse where we know the safeguards need to be, down into various downstream systems. So let's check the privacy scores that are enforcing this along the way. Are the safeguards in place? Well, when we add the privacy scores, we're actually bringing in information from our data privacy management solution. So we are actually able to understand the risk of the data related to this that's being passed in this flow. We're able to understand how protected it is and how sensitive it is. And unfortunately, we can see here that in this retail data warehouse in question, where we need these safeguards to be, we actually have no protection. We've got much better protection levels in other systems, but not in our data warehouse. So we're going to have to investigate this further. We can choose to jump into the object here just to have a closer look at the system itself. Systems that are linked to our data privacy management will have the option to show a dashboard that relates to data privacy. We can see here some of the issues in more detail. 100% unprotected, as we saw, is going to be our concern. So we want to go into this system and actually make sure that we protect this data. There's a URL that links us into data privacy management, which will help us define the system and correct this issue. So we log in as the same user, Richard Moon, but now in data privacy management. Richard is then able to navigate to the same system by going through the top data stores and filtering on the relevant details. If we search for retail, because we know it's the retail data warehouse, that should select the relevant systems. And we can in fact see here the retail data warehouse is listed as we expect, without any coverage and without any protection. Clicking into it will show us the proliferation of the data that has come into the data warehouse, and as we expect, it matches closely to what was in Axon, although there may be a little more detail. Here, MDM, for instance, is broken down into both a staging area and an objects table. The important thing is that we get to the bottom of these sensitive fields. So if we look at this little panel at the bottom here, we can jump into the sensitive fields that are unprotected. This is where Richard can choose to take an action. Because he's concerned about these fields, he can go to this take action option and actually use a predefined email that's a template. It's going to be sent to the right person to make sure that these are masked. The mask email is already configured for him. All he has to do is save and run, and his work in this area is done. He can now safely return to his Axon view so that he can inform his other stakeholders on the workflow of what he has done. Can jump directly back into the order management process because, of course, that is what is related to the system or resource we just saw in data privacy management. If he then returns to the change request in question, Richard is able to add a comment explaining that reasonable action has been taken to mask sensitive fields. And this will be where he can leave this for now. He's not going to move on the task quite yet because he wants to wait until he gets confirmation. But soon he will be able to progress this, and this privacy impact assessment will be able to be completed with his help and the help of the steward who picks up the masking email that he has now sent. So that's the end of that stage of the demo. And at this point, this is where Richard could return to his dashboard and use any more widgets to do any more jumping off tasks. Soon we're going to have a My Policies story that's going to talk about a violation of policy that Richard has set up. That's just in the works at the moment, but I wanted to share what we have so far. So if anyone has any data privacy management demos, you are welcome to use this. Thank you very much.